Okay.
Okay, this
Here
is
we
fun.
are.
This is a landmark interview, that I'd have where you're going to be the interviewee, Jackie.
I'm terrible at that, David.
Well, we'll see. We'll see. Because now...
I'll ask you what to ask me.
Well, you almost did off air. I'm getting nervous now. It's been a remarkable experiment, and which I've deemed to be very successful. We've done, I think, 32 videos in the last 18 months.
32?
We've interviewed most of our councillors, almost all of our politicians, elected parliamentarians,
Yeah.
and many good community leaders have come out. And I think on behalf of all of them, I'd like to first say thank you very much for taking this project very seriously, and also revealing a little bit of the softer and the authentic side of all those people.
Well, I love interviewing, and I love face-to-face interviewing.
Yeah.
And you know, the interesting thing is I'm a print dinosaur who just had the privilege of riding the digital wave, thankfully. So I like to be in the back room, out of the way. So I'm really thankful that I've had the opportunity to get used to myself on camera.
Well, I mean, from us, we're on the other side, producing the whole thing and then the editing afterwards. And as the listeners may have worked out, we were honest and authentic. There was no gotcha moments. We didn't want to catch people out. They all had an opportunity to edit things, and most all of them didn't, because they felt comfortable in your presence. I think that's a remarkable thing in today's media landscape.
Well, I think it was a really good opportunity for people who are reasonably high profile in our wonderful community to be themselves and just tell their story like it is. And they were fantastic and generous in their honesty and openness. And I really learned a lot about people too through the process. So thank you, Mum, for watching.
There are some welded-on users we see in the statistics.
Really?
Yes, there are.
Wow.
And we've had confessions from senior managers and other politicians who say they religiously wait for the video news. And I'd like to think that we've created a little bit of a different format. It's purposely fly on the wall.
Yeah.
You're in the real offices. People come in and they're very real. We're not a super duper studio. And I think that authenticity is rubbing off. And part of it is that you investigate so many things here on the Central Coast. I counted the stories that the three papers had done in the last 4 years, and there were 6,000 of them. Are you aware of that?
No.
6,000 stories are in your head at least.
No, I'm well. In a way, I am aware of it because coming here to these wonderful, independently owned, truly local newspapers, for me meant that I could stop commuting and stop compromising my editorial values for large corporate publishers and work in my community and really feel a part of the community. And I must say that I so admire Cess Pacello, Mark Snell and yourself for really backing these community news channels, whether they're the old print ones or the new digital versions. We live in a world where the truth and independent reporting are compromised. We've seen that with the naming of threatened journalists everywhere as Time Magazine's People of the Year, and of course Khashoggi. And I think that the model that Cess has created here is so important for...
Talk to me a bit more about that, because we all, I think, collectively understand that there's something going on, and Cess and Fran's long-term investment in and commitment and Mark Snell's vision all those years ago seems now to be not being ignored as it once was, and now with Nine Fairfax merging, what are your thoughts?
Well, look,
around that?
I've actually, had a very privileged career. I've consistently been able to earn a living from journalism since 1988, which few people in their 50s can say, because our industry has been basically
Decimated, really.
deconstructed,
Yeah.
decimated,
Yeah.
killed off to a great extent. And I was very fortunate in my 20s to work for Choice magazine, which is an independently owned, subscription-based, completely independent national heritage brand. And I suppose that taught me the value of truly independent reporting, because when you work for a subscription magazine, you're not compromised by advertising. And I actually left when I was about 26, 27, because I felt like I needed to learn about how advertising made a
into
difference.
The belly of the beast,
Yeah,
as it were.
yeah.
Is that true?
And what I've seen happen is fewer and fewer individuals or corporations owning greater and greater slices of particularly our newspapers across the nation. And I'm talking about the newspapers in the small towns and the newspapers in the regional areas. And now they fall into fundamentally two sets of hands. They fall into the News Limited, Rupert Murdoch stable, or now the Nine stable. Fairfax now ceases to exist as a brand. In the Nine takeover of Fairfax, the powers that be decided that Fairfax as a brand had no value, zero value. That for me as a journalist I find astonishing, and particularly...
It must hurt, because I know a lot of journalists have gone through Fairfax and the big mastheads in the big cities, but also very few people are aware of the large amount of regional brands where
ACM.
Heritage brands, they've gone back a long, long time.
ACM is the regional division of Fairfax, and I've read reports already, one in the Herald this week, about ACM being the slice of Fairfax that Nine's not really interested in, so they'll just sell it off. Now, we had Sam Dastyari before he departed Parliament saying, look, you need to ensure that there are independent regional publishers and that there is competition and that there's not monopoly, because monopoly means basically a lack of diversity and coverage, and that's not real news. Homogenous media content is not real news, because you only get one perspective, and there are many perspectives to stories.
Let me pause there, and your take on the decimation or the deconstruction, I think you used, of media and the introduction of social media. It seems to have filled a vacuum, I think, in a messy way. How do you as a journalist approach social media?
I approach social media as a lead. I approach social media as basically gossip. Look, it's a marketing mechanism.
Yeah.
So I love digital. I love the digital space as a reporting space. It means that there is a diversity of voices that continue, and we've seen the growth of sites like Crikey and The Guardian and The New Daily and on, Riot Act in Canberra.
The Batuta Advocate, dare I say.
The Batuta Advocate. The Batuta Advocate has a great place there. It's in a similar vein to, I guess, what Matilda used to be in some ways. I know it's complete satire, but social media is a blessing and a menace because it is a marketing tool. So my friend and I, Marianne, have been producing an independent news website called Muckraker for a couple of years, and social media for us allows us to publicise what we're publishing on our website.
Which seems to be the model now for the digital publishers, that it's there as an advertising medium or a lead generation medium.
Lead generation, and then you need your newsletter, which allows you to sell space. So you sell electronic space I'm talking about advertising
Can
space.
I ask you about that? Because there's been a lot of talk about those digital giants, primarily Google and Facebook, really ripping the guts out of the cash flows of local, the old streams of gold, and therefore undermining journalism in that way. What's your take on that?
I have a very alternative take on that, David. I witnessed from the inside Fairfax cannibalising its print products. It just the transition from print to digital has not been implemented by some of the major publishers across the world in a way that has protected journalism. You don't undercut your print advertising rates to the point where you have mastheads that are losing money because digital is an easier sell. Fortunately, I watched Choice go digital, and there was a point where the graphs crossed over, and there were more digital subscribers than print subscribers. But it was done in a.
They seem to have survived and thrived. Is that what you're saying? There's a way of doing this.
Well, I think they, because they're research driven, reader research driven, they identified that there were potentially two completely different markets with a reasonable core crossover that they could maximise if they retained a strong print base and introduced a digital base to a new market. Now, that's not what happened at Fairfax. And really, the decimation of Fairfax, Google and Facebook, they have a role to play, most definitely, but you need to the board of the corporation that was really could have
fought back, as you say,
governed a little bit better.
Well, on that, at a sombre note. Or to turn that around, what's happening in these community papers, where I've noticed that yourself and the team, that you've mentored so many good young people through the organisation in the last few years. I've watched people grow, university graduates and others grow. How do you think that part of journalism is going? Because it strikes me that there mustn't be very many opportunities for that now than there was previously.
There are so few opportunities for these young kids who are paying and getting into debt for qualifications in a dying industry. And the first thing I want to say is that the journalism schools need to get their acts together because they're still not acknowledging that the future is, to a large degree, digital and multidisciplinary. So you need to graduate with video skills, with digital skills, photography. You know, you need the whole kit and caboodle if you're going to get a job. And you also need an understanding, and I think this is where the newspaper owners, the media owners have lost the plot, that it doesn't matter what the delivery mechanism is. And this is the way people like Trump have been able to create this fear about fake news. Editorial standards are editorial standards, whether they're driven and delivered over traditional television, live streaming, print, and so the idea that journalism students can graduate without having an understanding of what news is.
Yes.
And how to report independently and how to use multiple sources and how to fact check appalls me. And so the reason why I came here to work was because I used to read Peninsula News when my girls were young and at swimming lessons at Peninsula Leisure Centre. And I'd read it and think, this is fantastic. This is a real newspaper. And we list our sources at the bottom.
I think on my research, you're the only one in the country that does that.
Yeah, and everyone asks why. And we need a lesson.
It's inspiration, or in a way.
It's fantastic because you know where the information comes from. And you know when it comes from one source, and sometimes it does, sometimes we just use the one press release. And you know when it comes from,
Multiple.
I mean, there are times when it takes, you know, half a page to list
To fill your sources.
the sources.
Yeah.
And we are completely transparent. So I was really, there's a big one.
Contradictory advice. Yes,
Yeah.
indeed.
And I suppose, I hope that the reading public, and I know because I get feedback, I get calls from people, you know, ordinary people phone me and say, I did not know about this until I read your paper, and now I'm going to get involved. And I think
it's remarkable how much this has turned it around. That honesty has turned it around. Just before we finish off, the unusualness of being employed by such a good employer.
yes,
It's a tough gig these days. I've got young children as you do, or growing children as you do, and finding a good employer in the media space must be a tough thing. And what's your take on that? Where do young people at all go for these sort of, if they want to get involved in the industry?
that's the thing. I think that the best grounding that you can get in this industry, and it was the grounding that I got because I started to do work experience at my local paper when I was 15, and you know, there were still typewriters.
Yeah.
And I used to have to physically file the black and white photos because papers were black and white in this big filing cabinet. And we were upstairs and the compositors, look that up in the dictionary, were downstairs, and the printing press was out the back.
Yeah.
And when you work for a local regional paper, you get experience at everything from slopping around at the cattle sale to covering local government and state government elections. And that is the best possible grounding. So don't worry about, I'm talking to graduates, don't worry about giving your services for free as an intern for months and months and months after you graduate at some second-rate newspaper company in Sydney. Apply for jobs all over the country, because small communities and the smaller community, the better, love their local papers. They rely on them completely,
They do,
and they will look after you, and you will get so much experience, and you will see this great vast land, and you know, have a ball.
What a wonderful way to finish off. And I know you're taking a pause for a little while, I'm going to say politely, and there'll be someone else in the seat, in fact, indeed myself as well. So I'd just like to say thank you very much for being part of such a great project, and more importantly, thank you so much for presenting so many great stories and to us all.
It's been an absolute pleasure. I have loved it. I've loved this place, and I do hope that the papers continue to thrive and grow.
Okay, thank you, Jackie.
Thank you, David. You're good at that.
All righty.